Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We'll get right started because I know you have to get back to it. But thank you for joining us as well.
My pleasure.
Well, I guess we'll start off with what was included in the budget. There was $100 million included for NYCHA funding. Were you happy with the final result?
I was ecstatic. I was overjoyed. For too long, I've been in the legislature for 23 years now. And I come from a district, and a lot of us come from the districts in the city of New York, where historically, on the federal level, on the state level, and on the city level, New York City public housing has been absolutely neglected. And I do mean neglected. It's almost like I've been beating my head against the wall in order to get more funding for public housing, especially in the city of New York. Now, that being said, this year, for the first time in all of my years, and public housing usually gets its money from the federal level of government. And for the first time, and as chair of the Housing Committee, and thankfully, many thanks go to our speaker, Carl Hastie, and we were able to collaborate and issue and transfer $100 million in state funds to New York City public housing. Now, that being said, of course, the 2 days before we were able to get that money to public housing by virtue of the budget, the federal government, spearheaded by United States Senator Chuck Schumer, was able to give $3 billion to New York City public housing. So, and especially, I think it was mostly earmarked for Superstorm Sandy repairs and such. And so they got $3 billion, $100 million. So it's been happy birthday, Merry Christmas, a whole lot of stuff for public housing, which actually is long, long overdue. And I was ecstatic to be able to put a down payment on some of the neglect that government has given to New York City public housing. And I think there's another $100 million for weatherization that was transferred from the federal government, specifically from HUD, to New York City public housing. And as I said, most of the money that goes to public housing is issued by the federal government. So it's primarily a federal responsibility,
Right.
which has been neglected, especially, I don't know how political I can get in here, but I guess I can get pretty political. Okay. Because of the, I guess, houses have been in Republican hands for many, many years, and I'm going back, not only to the Gingrich Revolution when, what's his name, Rick Lazio was chair of, I think, the Public Housing Committee, when George Pataki was our governor, when Bloomberg was our mayor. There was absolute neglect to our New York City public housing developments. And so I was overjoyed that we were able to do this and to make up for some lost time.
How far does this go to meet these? One number I read was $16 billion
Well,
in
no, I
unmet
think the
capital.
proper, and we're talking about capital projects. We're talking about the hallways, common
Right.
areas, the elevators, the mailboxes, the rooftops, just the boilers, the mold that's in city public housing. I happen to live across the street from, all my life, I live in the same apartment that I grew up in, but I happen to live across the street from New York City public housing. So these are our neighbors, these are our friends. These are the folks we go to school with, we go to work with. So, but I've heard I had a press conference about 2 or 3 days before we were to do the budget. We were supposed to enact the budget, and we had Shola Olatoye, the chair of New York City Public Housing, and I asked her the question, and she, I guess, said that she would need about $6 billion for capital improvements in order to fix all of the capital problems of the New York City public housing. Now, that being said, about 2 years before, I remember appearing on a hot day in the Drew Hamilton development with then Mayor Mike Bloomberg, who claimed that he had the magic bullet to cure all of the capital needs of public housing. And I stood in that press conference for at least 3 hours, and how much was ever done with that, I don't know. And I must say also that the money that we have given on the state level to government is conditioned that they spend the money on capital repairs. And they will be reporting back to us, the legislature, on how they have spent their money. So, because historically what's happened, not only in city budgets, but state budgets as well, and the federal budgets as well, is that sometimes an agency will get some money, and then they will just use the money and put the money to the general fund, and it won't go for its original intended purposes.
Right. I know there was some strings attached to the 100 million
A
in
lot
the
of
budget.
strings attached, a lot of strings
You
attached.
support that? You support more of the
Absolutely,
oversight of
no
the funding?
question about it, absolutely. I do support it wholeheartedly. You know, you trust your certain governments, but you also have to verify, so that's where we are.
Do you believe there needs to be a more dedicated source of funding for NYCHA?
Oh, absolutely.
And how would you like to see that
Listen,
done?
you have about 400,000 or 500,000 folks that live in New York City public housing. I happen to think that folks that live in public housing are the backbone of our city. They're our friends, they're our neighbors, as I said. And the original intent of public housing, when it was built like in the 30s and the 40s, it was supposed to be basically transitional for those folks coming back from World War II, or housing that was built right after the Great Depression. Well, because of the housing crisis, we have folks that have been living there from generation to generation and generation. So, and you have to remember that a lot of other cities are destroying their public housing. Look, in Chicago, there's a famous public housing development called Cabrini Green, where they just took bulldozers and just knocked it down. Now, what was built there, I don't know, but I can assure you, I'm sure those folks that were living in those public housing developments have not moved in. Again, in Newark, New Jersey, Cory Booker, who actually made a name for himself by living in public housing, I think for maybe about a month or two before he ran for mayor, there was what was the name of the developments? I think they were called the Park Avenue developments, where they were just knocked down. So I think our housing stock is too valuable. I think that we have too many people living there, too many people that are dependent upon it, because quite frankly, if those folks in New York City public housing, if they knock down the developments, there's nowhere else for them to go.
Right. So what would be one way to have dedicated funding?
Well, certainly I think that we need, and there's a whole financial paradigm that the banks have, I think Citibank in particular has been involved in, which is one way. And I remember Mayor Bloomberg and John Rea, then the chairman of public housing, came up with this scheme in order to get some sort of dedicated funding.
Is there one that sticks out to you that you?
There's not one now. I mean, besides from the goodwill of certain legislators like myself and other folks, there's really no dedicated funding. And quite frankly, the folks in public housing and the chairs of various developments have been screaming. They need some money and they need some help. So I'm thankful that we could help them this year. But there's really none that I know of, no real dedicated funding. And certainly I think something needs to be done, especially on the federal level of government, which has the main legislative and governmental responsibility to help and preserve public housing.
NYCHA will release its next generation plan in May. Are there any specific reforms that you're looking to see, that you'd like to see them propose?
Reforms that, oh God, I don't know, how long do we have? I'm sure there's a lot, and I'm sure the chairwoman, Shola Olatoye, will be more than happy to. I'm sure there are a lot of internal aspects, administrative things that they probably need to do. I just want them to make sure that our folks can live in public housing with some dignity. They can live in an affordable manner, and that they don't have to have the fear looming over their head that public housing will be sold out from under them.
In addition to the maintenance problems with NYCHA, there's also thousands of people on wait lists
Oh, sure.
trying to get into the housing. How could NYCHA address this problem?
Well, I think they're doing the best that they can. Now they're trying to do something called downsizing, where a lot of folks that whose families have lived in public housing, some of the kids have moved out. Let's say if one person, primarily a senior for that matter, who has, and I'm not condoning it, but those folks that have lived in public housing all their lives and the kids have moved out, what have you, and they live in a 3 or 4 bedroom apartment, they want to move them, they want to downsize them to a 1-bedroom apartment so they can get some more families in. But you have to remember that the folks on the NYCHA waiting list, you not only have those folks that are looking for an affordable apartment who really don't make a lot of money, but you also have those folks that are in the homeless shelters, those folks that have been affected by domestic violence, and those folks that, and they get moved up on lists and such, so those folks that have been burned out of their apartments. So the original intent of NYCHA has evolved in many respects. So, but that just shows the need, the real need, the absolute need for true affordable housing in the city of New York.
We'll move on to the 421A property tax
I've
exemption.
heard of that.
I'm sure we'll be hearing it a lot more, too. Where do you stand on the issue?
Well, this is the rent regulations and 421A have to be negotiated and legislated by June the 15th. So I happen to think that there is a need for 421A because we need to build more affordable housing. Now you have folks on different sides of the equation. You have your folks that are in the tenant activist movement that want to do away with 421A. You have the folks out of the real estate board that want to keep it just the way it is. And you have some of your folks in organized labor that want to get a prevailing wage exception. I happen to think that 421A needs to be reconfigured in some respects.
How so?
Well, I think there needs to be a low-income provision put in there. Folks, and let me just give you an example. My 27-year-old son has a job, a decent job, works for the state government, but the dude still lives with me. And the one thing he wants is his own apartment. I really want him to get his own apartment. I come home from Albany and drive 160, 170 miles or whatever the hell it is, and I know that I have, I happen to like Haagen-Dazs ice cream, vanilla. And sometimes that's all I can think about after my dinner, just, watch a basketball game and eat some ice cream. Nothing makes me angrier than when I get home and my ice cream is not there because he's eating my ice cream. Now, I want this guy out of my house. I love him, but he uses all my paper towels. He uses, and he just takes, not one sheet, he takes 2, 3, 4 sheets, at a time, Things cost a lot of money. So it's hard for our young people that maybe have a job to get their own apartments. So I happen to think that we need to put a provision in there that's gives developers an incentive to build for folks of relatively modest means. I think it's needed. I'll give you another example. In my district, there was a housing development put up on 155th Street and St. Nicholas Avenue, overlooking. You can see Yankee Stadium. If you ever go to Yankee Stadium, go over the 155th Street Bridge, you'll see it. It's a big black building, 200 units, low income, great, fabulous. Apartments are lovely, 2, 3, even 4 bedrooms. 200 units of housing. You know how many people applied to get into that development?
No.
100,000 people. 100,000 people for 200 units of housing. That just shows the need for number one, low income or truly affordable housing. So that's what I want to do. I want to put in some income thresholds that will give developers incentives to, so folks can, especially my son, hopefully he goes number one to the top of the list. So developers can build something nice, preferably in the area, and so he can see his mother, I guess, and then he can buy some ice cream and I can eat his ice cream.
There you
All
go.
right? Yeah.
So have discussions for 421A already started? Are they
Oh,
ongoing?
Lord, yes. I mean, that's all anybody wants to talk about. And I can tell you, I could talk about it now with various interested parties from now until June 15th. So without compromising too much of my position, I think folks pretty much know where my position might be. I will tell you this, I live in the same apartment that I grew up in. My same old rent-stabilized apartment. My same old rent-stabilized apartment. And I pay exactly $12 a month of rent, all right? If you think I'm gonna tell you how much rent I pay, you're crazy. So, but yes, I think folks probably know my position. I think the real estate community knows my position. But now it's time for the rubber to meet the road. So, so we'll be talking to the folks in the Senate. Now, how much the problems in the Senate are going to affect these conversations, I don't know. And but hopefully not much, because we have too much responsibility. We have too many people that these laws affect, and we have to adhere to our responsibilities and make sure that we can make sure that this city is a livable place for a lot of people, including myself.
For 421A and the rent regulations, how is the conversation going to be different now with Speaker Hasty rather than Speaker Silver?
Well, the jury's still out on that, but I can tell you, I mean, and Speaker Silver was very good on those conversations, but I do think that I don't expect anything to be different. I know that Carl Hasty has had a real commitment to rent regulations over the years. He and I have served together for the past 15 years together. We've talked about it on many an occasion. And what has happened in Harlem has happened in the Bronx and has happened throughout the city of New York in terms of housing. Listen, the number one issue that I get hit with in my office every day and just moving around, and they say, Keith, I need an apartment. I can't find a place to live. I'm being priced out of my district and out of my neighborhood. And folks just want to get a clean, affordable place to live. I remember what my grandmother told me years and years ago. She said, you should never pay more than 1/3 of your income for your housing. Now, people are paying 1/3, they're paying more. I mean, some people are paying at least 50, 60% for their rent. And quite frankly, we're going to be in an unlivable city quite soon if we don't do something about it. We have to do something about it now, and June 15th is as good a day as any.
So you believe that rents should be reduced for tenants? I guess part of my question is not even just renewing the laws. Would you like to see strengthened laws this year?
Oh, absolutely.
What are the chances
Listen,
are you?
I'm a guy where I live in the uptown equivalent of Stuyvesant Town. Stuyvesant Town is a development that was built for those folks returning from the war, World War II. I remember when my father was off in the war, this is a story I was told. My father was over in World War II. He asked my mother to go find them a place to live. First place he went to was Stuyvesant Town. And the Stuyvesant Town folks said, no blacks allowed. So I live in the uptown equivalent, so they built a place for black folks in metropolitan life up on 135th Street, and that's where I grew up. Now, and it's gone through various evolutions. And where we have 1,300 units of housing because of the rent laws and various harassment of tenants by one developer, one landlord in particular. Now we have 700 units of rent-stabilized apartments. So also I would like to put something in terms of harassment of tenants, in terms of because it's ongoing, it's prevalent, it's going on right now. So and it's very important. I mean, this is probably one of the most important pieces of policy that I've grappled with in my 23 years of being in the legislature.
Do you think the tenant make sure I think it's tenant protection unit
Yes.
that was included.
Yes.
Do you think this will help with
I
that
think,
problem?
I think the TPU is actually very, very good, and I'm glad Governor Cuomo's put that in. And I think it has been helpful. I think it needs to be strengthened. I think probably more, I think they may have maybe 8 to 10 full-time employees. And I think they've been funded to the tune somewhere around $5 million, but it needs to be strengthened, and their work needs to be improved because we're at a crisis right now.
And what role do you think Governor Andrew Cuomo will play in the
Well,
next month or so?
The governor has a big role. State Assembly, State Senate, governor.
Right. I mean, it seems that everyone knows where everyone stands in each house. It's really, Cuomo seems to be the wild card in the negotiations.
Well, I think the governor has shown a commitment to affordable housing. He comes from the housing network. I mean
His background.
His background, and I think he's been good on the issue. Although I don't really understand why he said what he said on Friday when he said that it's we just do a straight extender. I think that would be unacceptable if we just did the straight extender, and we would keep falling into going through the same problems that we've been going through. So I'm sure I'll be talking to his folks, because I don't think we can just keep doing what we've been doing. And I think it would be irresponsible of us as a legislature if we just kept doing what we were doing.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. No.
Is there any planning? I know in the past, the Senate has used the tactic of passing what they want and then booking out of Albany.
They've been very tricky from time to time.
Is there any planning?
Listen, I remember in 1997 when Joe Bruno was on the front page of the New York Post and said he was going to end rent regulations as we know it. And that's exactly what he did. He passed what he was going to pass, and then they got out of town. You're right. So that's why I don't want to deal with this, on June 14th. I kind of want to deal with this situation now.
Right. Is there more support moving towards, not waiting till the last minute with everything?
Don't know. I mean, we just, as I said, we haven't really, listen, my time in Albany, things happen when they happen. I'd prefer it not to happen at June 14th at 11:59, but we'll see how it goes.
Okay. And I found one thing interesting, or an idea brought up by, I know some advocates push for the legislature to lose control of some of these issues and have New York City have more control over it. What are your thoughts on that?
I guess you're referring to the Erstat law, where we would cede control
Right.
of the rent regulation question to the city council. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
It didn't happen, did it?
It's widely known as a long shot, but
Didn't quite happen,
I
did
think
it?
it's an interesting concept.
Well, interesting concept, but I don't think it was really given much consideration. I don't think it was given much consideration at all. At
And
least not by me, anyway.
Right. And for the last question, you've mentioned, the federal government's role in this a lot, so I have to ask, are you considering made a decision on running for Congress in 2016?
Funny you should ask. We have started what we call an exploratory committee, and I'm choosing my words carefully now. We've opened the exploratory committee, and no one has said no yet. Folks have been stopping me on the streets, and been very, very encouraging. Some of the folks in organized labor have been very, very encouraging. So we're looking at it very, very carefully. It's a little more than a year away, and we're giving it all due consideration.
Has Congressman Rangel said he'd endorse you yet?
He has not. He has said that the last time, and I was with him when last June and last November, that this would be the last time he would be voting for himself. And Congressman Rangel and I have a long, long storied history. I happen to think he's an absolute icon. That district is probably one of the most historic districts in the whole world. It's been represented by two people, the late, great Adam Clayton Powell, Jr., and Congressman Charles Rangel. And I think they've both done, they're both both folks will go down in history as being great congresspeople, and we're looking at succeeding them very carefully.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I think we're going to take a few questions from the audience,
Okay?
if there are any questions.
You see any possibility of doing anything about the billion-dollar and gazillion-dollar apartments and condos and other things going up in New York City by the oligarchs from around the world?
Yes.
What?
Well, I think I kind of answered that, at least I tried to, when I said at 421A, that it has been abused. It has been abused. And I think when I said that I really want to put some provision in 421A so that folks of lesser economic means would be able to benefit, because there needs to be incentive. Listen, I've met with various developers. I've met with the folks from the real estate board, and it's expensive to build these buildings. It's expensive. And no developer is going to build anything unless they can make some money out of it. And I think no developer is going to build anything unless they can make at least 5% of what their investment. I forget that. I think either 5% or more. So, but you know, this is a big city we live in, and developers don't care if they build for rich people or for poor people, just as long as they can sell what they build. So if we can give them some incentives to build for middle-class people and lower middle-class people, working-class people, they won't really care, but just as long as they can make some money, you know.
Freeman?
The way 421A is structured right now, there's certain parts of the city that are exempted from having to build affordable housing in order to get the abatement. Do you think that should be ended, that in order to get the abatement, you should have to have affordable housing anywhere in the city?
We're looking at it. I understand exactly what you're talking about. We're looking.
When you're looking at, do you think that it should be?
Well, there's an exception. I mean, if you build in certain areas, I think it's, you know, Manhattan or whatever, and we're looking at it. We're looking at it.
Any other questions?
You mentioned that these public housing was originally set up for transition from coming home from the war. Do you still see these units as a place of transition for people to kind of get a spot to live in, work, that's easy for them to get to their work, and then eventually move out into a better neighborhood, one with more potential?
Well, ideally, I mean, that's what it's all about. I mean, but and that was the original intent, I think, for public housing. But what has happened, because we have such a crisis, affordable housing crisis in New York, we've had generation upon families that have lived in public housing. I mean, ideally, that's the way it's supposed to happen. And, you know, you have the evolution of migration, the evolution of families and such, and kids ideally are supposed to do better than their parents economically, but sometimes that doesn't always happen. So, I mean, if that happens, that's good. So that just opens up another unit for a family that's struggling. But sometimes that doesn't always happen. Thus, we have the crisis that we're in. Now, I mean, the affordable housing crisis that we're in right now has a lot to do with economics. That has a lot to do with education. I mean, it's nothing stands by itself. It's all intertwined with job creation and so on and so on. So it's all connected.
I think we're out of time. We'll let you get back to the Capitol. Thank you for joining us
Okay, thank
today.
you so much.